Ain Beis of the Hemshech, Ain Beis, and we're holding the beginning of the Maimon of Shabbos Tshuva, Tovreish Ain Hey, and we're holding. We learned the pasuk Hanechi Hu Meichib Shoecha Lamani, and then we dealt with the questions that Rabbi GAFNE, and we got down to right down to the Union, where he asked the final question, that what does he say in the pasuk Hanechi Hu Meichib Shoecha Lamani? What's it mean that he does it for himself, Lamani? Again, so it's about 7 or 8 lines down in the new Maimon. And he says, "V'gam tzarich lahovin ma she'omar lama'ani, dal pi pashut hu b'shvili." The simple word, a simple pirush of the word lama'ani means for my sake, b'shvili. So ask yourself the question, Uma nogeh ha'inyan lamayla. How can you say that any inyan afila ha'inyan for chet va'oven is nogeya lamayla? Aloim chatosa ma tifel ba'i ve'im tzadakta ma sisalo ma kilo im tzadakta ma sisaloi. But that's a pasuk in Eiv that we see from that really afila inyanim van hepech ritzeinei are not really nogeya be'etzem elakus atzmai. The Olam Razal, the lesson of the Gemara, ma ichpes leila kodesh baruch hu im sheichet va'echo. What does it really matter to the Eibishter, the whole Indian of how you kill the animal, whether it's with the shchita or not? Ela lo nitnu ha-mitzvah, kol ha-mitzvahs, ela lo tzaref bahenas ha-briyos. What the Gemara reads is the conclusion that the whole nesina of the mitzvahs was only in order to purify and elevate the briyos, or not for Kodesh Baruch Hu. We have to understand that if the whole inyan of Torah mitzvahs is only klapi the odom, only for his sake, over legabi elakus biatzmai, as ma'ikpes lei וגם אם צדקת מה תיתן לי, אז so it's not moving the לשון למעני. ולהבין כל זה יש להקדים תחילה מה שנסבור לעיל שיש דלת עניונים. This whole second volume and the whole part of the hemshech beginning with the first Maimon of Rosh Hashanah of this year, Tovreish Ain Hey, was that it began with the statement that there are 4 inyanim which each have a certain inyan benegel atzmon, and then they have milas, each one legabi the other. V'hein, and we saw Dala Dinyanim Shahein Chaluchim Zemezeh, ובכל אחד ואחד יש יסורן מיילה זה על זה. והן הלם וגילוי, עין ויש, עצם ושפשטס, כוח ופויל. Those are the 4 concepts, and we dealt so far with the Helen Vagilui, and we completed the discussion of Ain Beis in the previous Maimon. So in this Maimon we're going to pay attention to Etzem V'Shpashtos and Koyer Poyo. V'Neshbuah the Helen V'Gilui Usha Gilui Nimtzo Kolol B'Helem. the Helam and the Gilui are only relatively different one than the other, even though there's certain dargas and forms of Helam Gilui which are close to the union of Yesh Me'ayin. But nonetheless, a Philo will say that it's only a Yesh Me'ayin Ruchni. It's like two dargas in Ruchnis which are close to being in the Oven von Ein Aroich, one to the other. Therefore we call them Yesh Me'ayin Ruchni, but they're also Be'etzem in Yonam, they're the union von Gilui HaHelam, which means that there's no really Schadshus Dover. A Dover Shahoya b'Madriga Daka v'Gedela was Yered u'Mishtalsel and Kamei Klorosinian of Ila v'Olo, for example. That is Masha Agile Nimtza Kolo B'Yahelam u'Kamei Meichen u'Mides u'Machshava u'Diva. Ein is Chatshus b'Skalas HaDover. There's nothing really new because the Oisias of Dibur were prior there in the previous higher state inside the uniform Machshava. And he can only talk what he can only bring out, but Dibur, what he was Behelam Machshavtai. V'lochein hu b'chinas Hagbola. Since the Gilui was Nimtza, the Dover HaMizkala was Nimtza, the Dover HaHelam, and now it comes out Kamoishu Hu Vafilo B'Madrega Tatena Yesa Nimtza that the Mokir itself was also Mugdar Binyonim Musayomim, which are already recognizable inside the Mokir. Which means that the Mokir Be'etzem must also be Mugbal, and it's able to contain within itself Dvarim Musayomim or Mugbalim. And therefore its Klolos Inyan is in even von Agbola, even benagir to how far it can be Nimshach, and as it were, the calmness of how much can be Nimshach, that Sokos there must be a sof to the Gilui. Even though it may be a Gilui, Godel V'otzim of Sokos there must be a bola in the Etzeminian. Maila, however, that's the chisaron, as it were. The Maila is the Shubchinas Kiro. The Dover HaMizkala is B'chinas Kiro, Al Makoiroi, which is moving, basically they're the same Indian, only in a much higher dar, Legabe, a dar Shemizkala, Achrei Shtalshus V'Yerida. Onam, Ain Beis, we saw, is another Indian, Menaheva, Shene, from Helam V'Gilui, and we saw Ain Hayesh Kolo B'Ha'ayin. Its Beklal doesn't have any state, the union of the Yesh, in the iron from which it's Mishave. The Beloi Dover, Lo Yesh Metzias Dover. If we say that Koloshen HaChoikrim HaRishonim and the Geonim, the Yesh Me'ayin is called Dover or Miloi Dover, then we say that Loi Dover is the absolute Shlila of any Dover, which means that there's no Metzias Koidemus to the age. Like the Loshen and Geras HaKodesh, Beli Shumila V'Siba HaKodemus LeYesh Hazeh. V'lochein hu b'chinas bli gvul. Therefore we saw that the koyach of Yesh Me'ayin, even though it comes in a form that the Yesh is a dover mugbal, it can be nimshach bli soch, and then an even from bli gvul mamish, heipach inen gilui me'ahelim. And therefore davke, since Legabi the Dover HaMitzaver, the Mokke HaMahaveh is an even von Ayin, Eloki Gomer, it's completely Loi Dover, Legabi that Inyan, therefore it's not Mugbal be Inyan Zeklal, and only produces it in an even Lamailami Asogan by in a row, does it even Yesh Me'ayin, where there's no Hagbolas in the relationship of the Ayin Legabi Diyet. And therefore he says, Achu B'chinas Helem, a pure Shelem, that the Misaveh is not Bekirov to the Mitaveh. It's in an even from Helem V'Hester, HaBoirei Me'anira, or Ayesh Me'ayin. Achu B'chinas Helem, She'ayesh Atzmai, Hu B'chinas Helem. He said, not only just that it's a Ina from Helem, in the sense that the Misaveh is Nelam, and Isalmas Gemura from the Dover HaMisaveh, but also the Etzem Yesh itself is an Anoiv van Helem. In other words, it's Maile Momastir on its own Inyan, which is a Koyach Eloki, which is Nimtza by Tomid, over the nature of the Yesh is to be Malim on that, and it's Bechinas Helem in itself. It's Malim on its own Inyan. He said, V'chein ha'ayin ha'elaki hu b'chinas Helem me'anivra. That's the second in which we already mentioned, that it's in an Eiva from Helem me'anivroim, Helem ve'esta ha'boyer me'anivra. Amashi yoidim halidei ha'paroseh. Yeah, we said the Be'ika, what causes all these inyonim is the in of the Helem ha'paroseh bein Malchus Datzilas Le'olam is Biyah, and the Nivroim should be Biyah. So he said that what we do know through the parasha, Hu Sheyesh Ain El Ho'eloki. We know there must be Ain Eloki, which would be Mahaved or Yesh, Aval Mahu Ain Eino Yodim Klal. There's no Hasoga or Yediyah Klal, Afilu V'derech HaShoreh V'chula, what's the etzeminian of the Ayin Eloki. You do a cloud, a kamoy alidei amashul, like we saw Baritas in the last verse before the end of the Maimah. We saw that alidei amashul yoidim rak sheyesh mashul amale ma'asoger. The mashul doesn't really teach you anything more than the etzem seichel sheba mashul, and from that we can sort of be Mashaya, Mataya Latzmeinu, that there must be a Inyan Mitoich HaMoshel Hazeh, Ezi Inyan Nifla, L'mayla Baruchnias, or Elokis, which is not more than Lanu Klau. We can only, just by very vaguely, have some Hashora Rechoik of what it's really all about. We do have some very, very distant these galas. But we only know, just by even clearly, that there is something there, L'mayla me'asoger. V'mayla b'zehu, as in Cain, that's the chesaron. It's all Helem both in itself and mitzad Helem v'esta mehava me'amitzaveh. And then we also see that that's due to the Helem v'esta of the boyer me'anivra, is due to the oven of the Yisavas B'klau, which comes from parts of Chulu, and therefore there's no Yediyah B'Hama'aveh, right to the fact that that we reach a conclusion that he's there, he must be there. So that's a Chisara. Was it the Maila B'zeh, Hu Shebo B'gilei, B'bchinas Ischadches? So the idea of an Ischadches, Gemura, that's Megala, the Koyach HaRein Tzoyim. Yekelosna the Alter Rebbe, Hu Levade B'Koyach V'Yecholtei. Lahav is a Yesh, Me'ayin V'Efes HaMuchlat. But those are the Geidel HaMaila that there is in Yesh Me'ayin. So now we begin the new chapter, V'hinei, Hamadrega Hamadregois, Hamamotzois, Bein Helem V'Gilei V'Yesh Me'ayin. What we just understood that they're like two Hafochim, Gemurim, one from the other. They're like two Katzoves, like two extremes or edges, and between them there are two Madregas Momotzois, and they are Etzem V'Shpashtas V'Koyach U'Poyel. So in order to understand that, how they're Momotzois and Be'ez Derech, we fix their inyan, what's the Hagdorah, Shebekolel Miyam, and how it's mamutaz between these two extremities, then we have to understand the inyan of each one b'fnei atzmai, and then we'll be able to reach a more final conclusion. He said, "V'inyan etzem v'hispashtas ein hakavona she'etzem hu hamispashim." When we say etzem v'hispashtus, we don't mean etzem and its own hispashtus, because etzem is not able to really be ayamasa etzem is not able to be mispashut. So he said that it's not the kavanah that the etzem itself hu mispashut. Shezeh b'chinas shefa. It's well known in the long discussion in some above. The manyan, as far as I remember, the Tafki around about this parsha. In some above, that begins a whole big biur when they get the difference between oyer and shefa. Ukiyadua, however, between oyer and shefa, the oyer hu racha ora levad v'loi etzem. V'shefa hu she'etzem mispashit. A kavanah that the etzem itself goes wherever it has to go. Ukamoi shifas mayim, that the inyan of mayim yardim mimokim gavur l'mokim nomuch is the same mayim that was l'mayla is now nimtza l'mokim anomuch. Well, that's called shifas mayim. The etzem shamayim nimshochim mimokim l'mokim. Gavur l'nomuch, the lashon of the Gemara, that the mayim itself is nimshach. The commission is bulliel, perignen gimel, what here in the hemshach of Ain Beis. There's also quite a discussion over there in those prokim, benegir to oyer shefa, and particularly was the biur and the inyan of shefa. So he said that's not our kavanah him when we talk about etzem b'hispashtus. He said v'kana kavanah b'hispashtus min ha'etzem. Here we're talking about an inyan which goes off from the etzem, and it's called an initial hispashtus. Yeah, he said the hispashtus hu be'ein haroig lagabi ha'etzem. Not only that it's not the etzem itself, but it's also a dover, what ultimately it's ein haroig klal, yeah, lagabi ha'etzem. It's only what we describe as we'll see, a ha'ora, which has no error to the inner of the etzem cloud. Umikol mokim, einam v'chinas chachas gemura. It's not in the infinite yesh mi'ayin. We said that the ein hareich is so much that it's a chachas gemura. Amit yisinam is chachas. Over here we're going to tell you that even though it's kilo, adov ve'en hareich, legabi the etzem, but in that respect it's like kilo, adov chodosh, as it were, legabi the etzem, but it doesn't come in the form of a ischachas, of a new entity, but even so, and therefore he uses the expression in other words, there is a certain arguable trace of ischachas there, but it's not in the name of an ischachas gemura. By hispashtas, he kamoi ha'etzem. And the hispashtas, even though it's a dova nimtza me'ha'etzem, it's like the inner of the etzem. Mashkin kamoi. Meaning it's the Veloshna Alter Rebbe, it's Ma'ayin ha'etzem. Mashenkin, the inner of Yesh Mi'ayin, the Ischachas is Ischachas Gemurah, and it doesn't have any demon cloud, doesn't carry in itself any similarity cloud to the etzem. So therefore the famous dogma of this concept that we are trying to get at, which is Oyer V'Hispashtus, is the inyan van ukamoi oyer hameya, ukamoi oyer umoyer. Just like the inyan van light and luminary, source of light, mamish. in the form of a luminary. Shehamo'oyer hu ha'etzem. V'ha'oyer hu ispashtus min ha'etzem. In other words, if you've got a dover, you have mudo betachlis biatme, which is called the ma'or, and from that goes off a ispashtus, a certain emanation, as we might call it, from the etzem. And that's the concept that we're aiming at. And we see already that it's sort of, it's like a dover chodesh, but it's not completely, and it's not the inyan Gilui HaHilam, because we can't say that the oil was kolol in the moya in the sense it was there and just came out b'derech gilui, because even though it's nimta me'amoya and it's meya min amoya, we're going to see that it's not really there in the moya, that the moya is mudro mikol ha'gilui. So he says, Harei ha'oyer min hamoya ene bo b'chinas selam v'gilui. What we just said. It doesn't come in that oifen. Li'yesha hamoya eno b'chinas oyer klal. When could you say that the oil or the expressions would be in oifen from Gilui HaHelem if there was some sort of similarity and there was some sort of inyan? And even though we just said that the oil, or rather the spashtas, is kamoya etzem, and now he says that the moyas ain't b'chinas oil klal. It's not anything like that. So what we meant by the expression kamoy ha'etzem, we meant certain trays that are there in the etzem. Or not that the etzem and it are one essential entity. No, on the contrary, they're completely muvdolim, one from the other. Ukiyadu, the kol etzem, bilti mispashet or bilti mizgala. Therefore, we have to say that it can't be Gilui HaHilim, because everything which is etzem, ba'ivin amiti, then it's not mispashet. It can't possibly be mispashet in a way that we could say that this is mamish kamoy ha'etzem, because the etzem itself remains mudol within its own self. Building mispashet or building mizgala is very close to the same idea. The etzem itself doesn't, through any media, reveal itself. It remains mudol b'tachlis avdolah b'mer shehu. And that's what we're going to see, that we really have no, even though we're going to say that the oyer is meya from the etzem in a oiven and kiruv masuyam, it's not going to be in a oiven that it's misgale ali deitzer. On the contrary, it remains, and what we say is kamoy ha'etzem, is that it has certain trays and certain inyonim which it's mizgala in the spashtas is megala, or not as megala the moya kamoy shehu. And therefore he says, kamoy ha'ish ha'yisod, he gives a dugma as put down on the Ramban of a Pirushay al Torah, that the inifan eish ha'yisodi, for example, the original yisod or eish ha'yisodi, from which it's nimtzah the inifan eish ha'yisod ha'eish pepastus lamata in this world. He said the inifan eish ha'yisodi shehu etzem choshuk. It's mamish not like the inifan eish lamata b'klal. But what do I mean by saying it's choshuk? Not that we're saying that it's mamish black or dark, but what we're saying that the eish ha'yisodi, how it is, and the Ramban brings that it's kiru seva v'es kol ha'oretz, it's mamish an entity in high madrigas Kilo Lamaila Mizeh Ha'olam, the Yesh HaYisodi. Yeah, so he says, Kavona Bazeh, in saying that it's Choshuch, She'ena B'chinas Oyer. The inyan van Eish, which is Nimtza B'menu Lamata, is the inyan van Oyer. Ve'ila the Eish HaYisodi is not that. And yet, nonetheless, the Eish HaYisodi is Mizgale Miha, the Oyer, or Eish, the Yisod HaEish Ariz Lamata, is a inyan van Oyer, and it's Mizgale Miha Eish HaYisodi. So therefore we see that as a concept where the Eish HaYisodi is Choshuk, meaning it's not that inyan what the pashtus of it is, the Hainu, the Eish, Yisod HaEish Lamata, and yet nonetheless, even though that's not it, it is Mizgala Mizeh. We have to say, so that there must be some inyan that's in some way representing, and it's as it were a ha'orah koshehi from the inyan from the Eish HaYisodi, even though the muvdolim zemizeh. So he says of Kamoi Kain, if we want to get a bit closer to our understanding, Kamoi Kain guf ve'etzem hashemesh. If we take the very essence of the shemesh that we know, he says, Eino b'chinas oyer, ki im moya, the shemesh can't be called light. Ki im mo oyer shememena nimtza. Now that word nimtza is going to be very key later on in the whole argument, that this whole inyan of his pashtas is a very interesting inyan whereby the moya gives of itself, and at the same time it doesn't give itself beklal, and it gives itself ad kedi kach that you can say that the is ma'ein hamoya or kamoya moya, and here on the other hand it gives in a way that it's completely lo ba'erach, and therefore it's called in an even that it's not the inyan from moya beklal, ve'ena mishane ve'ena ipes la v'chulu. Like we see in the whole inyan of the shemesh and the light that goes from it. So therefore there's a mitzad echad, a big hevdel gomo between the two things, and yet there's a hamshocha b'ihim kazeh that sof kol sof there's a certain similarity in the dover hameir, in the hispashtas, to the moya. So we're going to see that those two inyonim are expressed in the word nimto, that as it were the moya it produces from, allows to go out from itself in an even from devekis, one might almost call it. I suppose we could call it devekis, but in a way that it still guards Ain van Ain Oro. We're going to see that that's like a certain step towards the middle between the two extremes. You can't say that, because if it were, then it would be like Gilu Ahelim. Then we could say that this oil, which goes out of the shemesh, was anyway coral inside the shemesh, or it was there in some way inside the shemesh, and it just went out, because they're basically the same entity. So you can't say that the shemesh is an infant light. Ki im mo oyer, it's a luminary, it's a source of light. Shememena nimtza oyer, lo ishu buchinas mokia lo oyer. What mokia lo oyer means, once again, the concept of Gilei Ahelim, that the inyan is there, and it's nimtza, but take makoiroi, and it goes out in an even from Yerida, but there are ishtalshalos, with the kloli hagiloi that are shayt to a particular ishtalshalos. Like we saw Barichas earlier. I now ask a kasha of the Sefer Shalbeinani Ain Beis, Ain Beis, that's the famous Perek in Shara Yichud, where Muna, they use of that expression, in one of the sentences over there that he does say that the moya, that the shemesh is mokia ha'oyer. So he says, sorry, that that's not meduyak. We have to say shezehu sha'oyer nimtzo mimeno. So he uses over there the word mokia. We could suggest that the hint is that that's like a shema mushal. The word mokia is like being used in a borrowed sense. That mokia means that one thing derives or comes out or has some kesher with the other. So in that way we call the shemesh mokia ha'oyer, but not that it really is. Ella, the kavanah is that sof kol sof it's nimtzov, the derech miyuchad. We're going to describe as we go along that ishpashtas is nimtzov from its etzem. And therefore it uses the word mokia in a borrowed sort of a way. V'lochein be'emes ha'oyer hu bein arei klal legabi ha'moya atzmei. And here we get now closer to the other side of the orbit, the Indian of Yesh Mi'ayin. That's why we saw that the Yesh was Ein Arok Klal. So he's going to the Rebbe is going to say now that Indian of an Ein Arok, or a concept similar to that Ein Arok, is also found in the Yachas between the Oyer and the Moya. And therefore he said, V'lochein be'emes ha'oyer hu bein arei klal legabe ha'moya atzmei. Mishum zeh, ein onu yodim min ha'oyer es ha'moya. Here we don't know anything about the Moya from the Oyer, even though we do. But what he means that we don't know anything, he means in the beginning to the Mahus of the we know certain trays or things, and therefore we say the is me'ain hamoya, although we don't really know anything about the very essence of the moya, because it's mudal legamri mitzad echad, and the is absolutely ein arok legabe. U'ma she'onu yodim min ha'oyer. What we do know from the about the moya, so he says, hine le'aha kol hayediyah. After all that we do get to know, and all the information that's given to us, we are shores, and our assessments and judging and forming ideas and so on in our minds, yekama shonu yodim u'misharim min ha'oyer b'hamoya u'rak metzias hamoya. All that we can possibly know and be mashayeh and work out possibly for ourselves is that we can come to through the Yoah towards the Moya, Urak Matthias HaMoya. All we know is that there is a Matthias of the Moya of Eloi Etzem Mahusay. Of Etzem Mahusay we don't know B'Klal. That's the Pshat. Or that's the Indian of, even though we say that Oyer is Me'in HaMoya Kiroshana Alter Rebbe Ayedua, that Oyer does have a certain Indian where it's Me'in HaMoya, but that's not in the Etzem Mahus, that's in certain trays which are important to the Moya, but not that they are Inyonim Mahusiyim or Atzmiyim. וזהו, מפני שהוא בין הרי כלל לגבי האצם. So here we're already seeing a certain similarity in Cain to the Indian of Yesh Mi'ayin. So there's going to be a certain similarity in Etzem Vishpashtas to Yesh Mi'ayin. And yet, Avu V'Kain, we're going to tell that they're not mamish klal, the same Indian. And also, there's a certain, as it were, trace of Gilei Ahilam, a certain nearness in the concept of Etzem Mishpash also to Gilei Ahilam, and we'll sort of have to work it all out as we go along, that's like the the name that we gave it earlier, a Madrega Mumutzaz, like an in-between Madrega between those two extremities of the whole picture of the four inyonim. So therefore he says, "K'may kain ha'oer shabiz galas hu b'ein harig legabe ha'oer k'mo shehu kolo b'ha'etzem." Oh, so now we're moving, and here it's very fascinating. So first of all, the Rabbi had to put down all these inyonim in like a general, definitive way, and now he's going to move into one or two, like, I don't know how to say it, more specific and protistic inyonim, which will lead us to a more careful Hadora Beklal Dinefan Etzem Vishpastas. So he said, Kamoy Kain, just like we've said now, that the Oyer is Ainu Aroi Klal Gabi HaMoya, and now we call for the moment the Inifan Etzem. So we've drawn from that a conclusion that anything that can be called Oyer Legabi another Inyan is that Ein Arik Klal Legabi its Inyan, that it's called Oyer from that. In other words, from its level, which Legabi that it's like Oyer, or as we're soon going to call it, the Ispashtas. We've seen now these different inyonim that we can know, but not really know anything mahusi, and the mishum kach there's a inifan ein array v'cholo, and that the moya is not really any gather of at all, and as ba'avdola gemura mea oyer mea is pastas. Those inyonim we're not going to see in a more specific interrelation, and from that we'll be able to build, and we'll see that this whole inyan of etzem mishpashtas is talking also on certain, within certain very delicate, what you might call gedorim, offenses. So he says, Kamei Kain, ha'oyer shebizgalas. Now when he says oyer shebizgalas, he means oyer shebizgalas, what the Alter Rebbe calls it over there in Perek Gimel, the inyan from oyer ha'meir v'cholol ha'olam in the moshel. In other words, the oyer which in the nimshal, it's the oyer which has already been meir, lahavis ha'olamas or lahachiyos. Not just the air of Shayach Elohim, as we learned earlier, that's even the air of Shalif Me'at Tzimtzum, but the air how it is Bizgalus Mamish to the inyan of the Elamas Lahachiyoisam. So he said that air Shabizgalus, who bein arich legabi air kamoishu who kolo beha'etzem. Let's take now the air which is kolo inside the etzem, Lekabi the which is mitgaleh, and where do we see such a relationship? He said, "Komoshikosu b'sefer shel beinanim shom be'inyan v'ziv hashemesh yeshavavadai hu nimtza b'mkoirei." What ziv hashemesh is the ziv which is meir lo'ilam u'lodorim aleiho. In other words, that's the oil of the shemesh, how it's meir in cholol ha'olam. So he said, "Shebavadei hu nimtza b'mkoirei." Like he brings over the Kal V'cheima, what he said, "Im hu yochol lahoya b'mrochek b'cholol ha'olam." It can be meir, so as a word, distant, and in yonim so kilo bizgalas, then koshkein shu yochel im lahoya b'mkoirei, then how much more it can be meir mamish in the shemesh itself. So he said, "Harei kamoishu hu be'etzem hamoya, harei hu gamkein lo yibchinas oyer klal." But it's mashma that it's not really oyer. It's like the Lashon of the Zohar, Kodesh Lavinu Nehoirim, that even though it's not the opposite of oyer, but it's not really oyer klal, like he writes in the Lashon over there in Shara Yehud, in Perek Gimel, Shesham B'finas Ain Beis Mamish. He said over there, the oyer, how it is in Etzem HaShemesh, is even von Ayin Beis, but it's well known the difference between them. Ayin is just a shlila legabi yesh. V'ilo Efes means mamish ayin von bitl muchlat shein lezekol matziyas. So he says, that's the in and what he writes over there. Also, if you look it up over there, the Lashon is that it's also Eina Oile B'Shem Klal. It's not really callable by a name at all. In other words, it's completely beyond any metzius of oyer. How it is a koral in the etzer. Harei kamoshu be'etzer mamoyer. Where are we? Kamoshu koral be'etzer. Kamoshu be'inin v'ziv. Harei kamoshu be'etzer mamoyer. Harei hu gamkein lo yibchinas oyer klal. She'ein shu ayin ve'efes mamid. V'kamoshu hu chutz lekadur hashemesh. Now it's already meir chutz lekadur hashemesh in the cholol ha'olam. Hariyu b'chinas yesh mamid. Because it's then meir to something. It's meir to the olamas, like the expression in davening, ha'meir la'oretz v'ladorim aleihah. It's of course the kavanah is to be lahoiras anivroim, or oinamas beklal. Therefore, it's already chutz lekadur hashemesh. Arishuhu be'enorei. That comes out that the way it's meir and cholol oilam, it's mamish enorei legabi how it is bimkoirei. So if we take that yachas now, and we take the oyer kameshu mamish kol bimkoirei. Legabi the inyan how it's meir, afterwards chutz mikadur hashemesh b'toy cholol ha'olam. Then he said that's a inyan of ein roig man, because that's yesh, to a certain extent it's like a yesh, legabi something which is ayin va'evet. So here it's a different sort of idea of yesh legabi ayin, meaning something which is bottled. Be'etzem minyonei, and something which is poel mashu acher, it's poel to something, therefore it's called a yet. Harei shuhu be'ein harei. So we see then that's mamish ein harei, rak shezehu ba'er, k'may shu bizgalat chutz lekadur hashemesh. That's the oyer, how it is already outside kavachu, chutz. From the etzem kadur hashemesh, and how do you get that? How can that possibly be? If the oil which is cold in the etzem hashemesh is so bottled and so not in a madrega of an oil, then how do we get the oil b'tech chol oilam yet to be a matzias kolkach? So he said, zehu alidei hefsechah na'ateg. Well, that's one like the author brings over there, that the na'ateg is kilo oiches, that's oil, and morir to into a dagger, that he's able to be meir la'oretz or l'dorim aleyo. So that's the inyan of the na'ateg, la'shemesh. Come over in the Gemara that Osi the Kodesh Baruch Hu Lahoiti, as a shemesh min na'atekoi, is a simon that there's a sort of a na'atek which surrounds kaviochel the shemesh. He said, "V'hu b'chinas yesh," well, that oil which is nimtza al yedei the na'atek is a inyan from yesh legabi ha'oil hakolu b'hashemet she'ino oila b'shem oil v'ziv. Oh, here he brings that lesson to stress the head of between the two levels. He said, "Shadugma yemisel amayler ugile erakav." Oh, here we meet the idea of the kav. Well, the kav is already shayach to Milo Mata and to the Gilui, which is going to be Mahava and Machaya, that's called Oilamas. So he said that's Kilo, the Gilui, the Ernakam, Mia Erein Seif Shlof Neatim Tom. But that is a Bechina of Yesh Mi'ayin. That's got in itself a certain inyan of Yesh Mi'ayin, Kameshakosa B'Lakuti Terah, Dibra Mascho Tiku HaBeis, Be'Hagor. There's a bracket of it in the Maimon from the Alter Rebbe. But there, the Alter Rebbe is Masbir. The Mamish that he talks about the Kol Batz Musei, and then he says the which is Meya Al Yidei Akav, Miya Madriga Hu, then that's a inyan from Bedimian to the inyan from Yesh Mi'ayin. So we see then that the Kav has got all sorts of certain trays in it, which it sort of depends how you look at it. And that's what he says now. He said, and in brackets he writes, U'bi'emes. We said before, we argued before, in a chapter not so far back, the Bi'emes Gilei Akav Hu Rak Gilei Me'ahelem. Kamashins Borli Perek Shin Dalet, which is a couple of chapters back. Rak says, Hu Kemoy Yesh Me'ayin. Yeah, it's really Be'emes, it's Gilei Ahelim. Now we said at the beginning of the Shiur, there's certain Gilei Ahelims which are a doime mo'id to the inyan of Yesh Mi'ayin, even though they're not mamish the inyan of Yesh Mi'ayin. He said, Rak says, Kemoy Yesh Mi'ayin, Kemoy. Sheba Mekoira Hu B'chinas Ayin, like we said before, it's not using the word ayin in the sense of the real ayin of Eliki, Lekabit Yesh. No, meaning it's like a beetle dikazar, which has no matzias, ayin for ayin. Or Vizgalas, Alidea Tzimtum, yeah, B'chinas Yesh, but that's the inyan of B'dimian to the Na'atik HaShemesh, yeah, V'chulu. The commission is B'oliyu Perek Shin Tesvav, She'ena Doima Asaida V'adroga B'amshochas HaKav Me'yorinta, which is of course in its absolute form a type of adroga, but it's a very different type of adroga. She'elefnei Atzimtzum, Kamoy Amshochas Ha'eres D'Atzilus, for example. From the level of the Kav is already in Ak, in Akudim V'chulu, L'gabe Atzilus, but that's also inyan from Gilei Ahelim, but in a more direct way, mashing in the Gilei the Kav from Koidem Atzimtzum is more drastic. Of it's also Gilei Ahelim. Yeah, and why is that? How can you say that? That's what we argued over there. ומכל מוחים ליש הצמצום הוא בשביל הגילוי, הרי זה גם בכינוס גילוי המהלם. So over there, the Rebbe argued a pillar dika'inian, I don't know if you remember, we learned about it, that how can we say the Kav is Gilei Ahelim, so the Kav comes with Derek, the Stokers, Achreize, Kfitze, Dilug, Hatzimtzum, V'chulu. How can you say that that's in your Gilei Ahelim? So over there we tried that since the Tzimtzum, the whole purpose of the Tzimtzum was Laman Hagilui, Animtza, that in the Ur Shabbat Achrei Tzimtzum is do the Kavanah Hagilui. Nimtza, the B'shas, the Etzim, Tzimtzum, the whole Kavanah was really Gilui. And remember, Nimtza, the Tzimtzum is not a hefsek, but it's like a form of a further process in the Inyan HaGilui. But that was a Dover Nifla, but we'll talk about that more, Beis Hashem. So guys, you'll have to forgive me, tonight I've got to make a very important phone call, because there's something which is shy to tomorrow night. So, Beis Hashem, you're aware of the fact that tomorrow night we have the simcha of my daughter Nechami is getting married in Kwachabad, and we've already spoken about that, and we're hoping to see you, and I hope we'll all meet up at Simcha to Levo. And it's really a very great Simcha. And the Rike zal zijn a Simcha Midius al Kora Shonim Kula al Kora Zman Kulei Ve'yaicha from the Nitzchias of that small opinion we should immediately move and see B'nei Bosa Kipshute the Binyan Nitzchi the Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi. So
Nishama Maruda Levotzat Yerushalayim
guys and Chaim, and please forgive me, I've got to sort of move Bezrizas now. Somebody's waiting for me to call. So
Chaim Rabbi GAFNE.
Yeah, Chaim.
Rach nachat kol hayomim.
Oh man.
L'chaim binyan ad hayad.
Oh man. Das ist der Rike. And Hashem shelo v'yimtech rachova b'gashmias v'amer v'gam beruchnias gam yachad. And der Yeshorim Yoveru metek simcha page 653. And yachad im simcha tzoilom take me out mamish. So hoping to see you tomorrow evening, guys. The Kufa is supposed to be at 7:30, so I hope it'll be around about that time. They called it for 7 apparently, but they mean 7:30. So hopefully around about that time, that'll be the Kufa. So meantime, be well everybody, and hoping to see you all. And Terika, Besimcha, Meyimach Upnimis Alei. Go to